Hey, what's going on everyone? Today's video is going to focus less on fishing and more about safety aspects as a kayak fisherman. This trip was a scouting trip of sorts, so we launched out of King Harbor and we paddled probably like 6 miles out and we're hanging out over here. As it turns out, the fishing was kind of slow, and that's the way scouting goes. You're not going to strike gold with every outing. But on the way home, there was a sequence of events and factors where I get to kind of talk about the important safety aspects of being on a kayak. So as I mentioned in previous videos, 90% of the people, maybe more, that launch out of Redondo Beach are going to go south. I think the fishing is better and more varied. And for us kayak fishermen, there are weather considerations or oceanic conditions that you have to factor in. Here we are looking at a quick and dirty 7-day forecast for my area. In general, swells are much easier to predict. When you're on the water, you can see them, you can feel them. And I generally don't have a problem with swells. I'm assuming you're not going to go out in like 9-foot swells. But if they're like even 6 feet and the period of time between the bumps is good, I'd say like 10 seconds or more, I can deal with them. I have no problem with that. The element that you have to be much more in tune with is wind, okay? Wind. So if I see the wind forecast and I see bumps that go up to 15 miles per hour, I generally will not go out. And if I do go out, I will not venture like maybe 2 miles out, nothing more than 2 miles out. And just as importantly as the speed, you have to focus in on the direction of the wind, which is right here. Now, in my area, okay, and don't assume this is gonna hold true for where you fish. In my area, 90% of the time, the winds will blow out of either the south or the southwest. So if we look here, if we launch here and we paddle here, that means that when we are done fishing and we're tired because we've been on the water for like anywhere from 6 to 12 hours and we're ready to head home, we are going to have the wind at our backs. I cannot overemphasize that. Wind is a much more fearsome element than swells. Again, swells are what they are, they're visual. Wind is not visual. You can't really see it for the most part, but it plays a much bigger role in safety. So if you look at the forecast and you see high swells and high wind, so for example, if you're seeing swells that are 6 foot and wind peaking at 15, do not go out. If you're seeing high swells with moderate wind, something below 10 miles per hour, that's your call. If you're comfortable with a little bit of sporty action, then yeah, you can do it. So let me give you a real world example. Let's say you're about 2 miles out fishing the Paloman wreck, okay, and you're ready to go home. If you have a 10-15 mile per hour wind at your back, okay, the trip back into the harbor is going to be super casual. You're going to be like at 50% effort, you're going to be joking around with your friends, and you're going to be home in probably less than 1 hour. On the other hand, if you have a 10-15 mile per hour wind coming out of the north in your face as you paddle home, I guarantee you there's going to be no joking. Okay, and I guarantee you, well, I can almost guarantee you, you're going to be traveling at less than 1 mile per hour at 100% effort. There's going to be no joking. Everyone's going to be miserable, and it'll take you probably 3 hours or more to paddle back from 2 miles away into the safety of the harbor. It is that important. Wind can be your best friend, or it can be your worst enemy. And there is one other important component, and I'm gonna zoom in here. So for whatever reason, and I'm not a meteorologist, so I can't explain why, but right around here, it gets super choppy. and the swell action is completely unpredictable. So when you're like way out here, for example, okay, the swells are going to be relatively easy to deal with because they're all coming from the same direction. But once you get around here to the mouth of the harbor, the water is basically just coming from everywhere, and it is completely unpredictable. And that's why on the newbie kayaking video, I advised everyone to stay away from this area. This is like the worst water that you're going to encounter at Redondo Beach. So on our trip, we were fishing as far away as here, and then toward the end of the day, we start paddling back, and we're posted up on top of Palawan. And really, throughout the day, there was no wind. It was dead calm. It was very unusual because typically in this area, wind will pick up around like 10:30 and blow pretty good until about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. But for whatever reason, on this day, okay, we're fishing here, and around 2:30, the wind starts to pick up, 10, 15 miles per hour. And more importantly, my spidey senses are telling me that the wind is not blowing out of the south. Okay, the wind is blowing out of the northwest. Now, that is not the worst kind of wind. Okay, the worst kind of wind is going to be blowing out of the north in our faces as we paddle in. So we're dealing with more of a crosswind. It's not as nice as a wind that's coming, from your back, but not the worst. So at that point, I decide, no, this feels a little bit weird, right? So first of all, the wind is picking up at the wrong time of day, and more importantly, it's coming from the wrong direction. So we skedaddle and we paddle in. We get to this area, and predictably, it's choppy. Now here at the mouth of the harbor is where the dicey scene plays out. Now, I am not the kind of guy who is into embarrassing people in public, and so I blurred out the image. Look, I've done more than my share of dumb things and paid the price. So don't be the guy who leaves like negative comments saying things like, well, he should have been here, or he shouldn't have been here, or he should have been doing this, or he shouldn't have been doing this, because you will piss me off and I'll just delete the comment.
Yeah, it's probably the worst right here. See how there's no rhyme or reason, it's just, the rinse cycle. Just bumps coming from every which way. Hard to predict, but you gotta keep your hips loose. You gotta kind of go with the wave action and keep your hips loose. And then the other tip is when you exit or enter the harbor, stay away from the jetty. Okay? Because if something goes wrong, you don't want to be anywhere near those rocks.
No more than 5 minutes after I uttered those words, this happens.
Uh-oh. Did someone go in the drink? Yep, someone's in the drink right there.
Now you can't see it, but as I'm paddling, this guy is making 2-3 valiant efforts to reboard the kayak, and he can't do it. I think generally speaking, if you are capable of reboarding, it's going to happen within the first 2, maybe 3 tries. After that, a little bit of panic sets in, the water's cold, you get a little bit tired, and it's probably not going to happen without help. So I wouldn't call this situation dire because he has a PFD, he's not in danger of drowning, but there's a pretty good wind blowing him toward the rocks. That's the issue. So we probably have about 5 minutes to get into some kind of safety. Now, what's about to unfold is going to seem kind of cold if you're a decent human being. I'm basically going to paddle right past him and just give him some instructions, okay? What's worse than one person in the drink is 2 people in a drink. And some people by this time might be a little bit panicky. So if you get your kayak near them, they might start grabbing and clutching and you may go in the drink. So my game plan is to get inside the harbor, which is only about 50 yards away. And then I'm gonna pull my tow rope out of my front hatch. At that point, I can tow him to the safety of the harbor, at which point he may be calm and he may be able to reboard the kayak.
Okay, so I thought I was gonna have to pull out a tow rope and tow the guy inside the harbor where it's calmer. But it looks like Rich was able to get him back on his kayak, so he looks okay. But, you know, I mean, you gotta be ready for these types of episodes. I mean, you gotta have kind of like an emergency plan. But anyways, all's well that ends well.
So there you have it. Not a terribly entertaining video, but hopefully informational, and we can all kind of learn something from what we've seen. I would also stress that everyone should carry a bilge pump, because at some point someone's gonna go in to drink, or maybe you're doing a beach launch or whatever, and even if you make the beach launch okay, or even if the guy reboards okay, there's always going to be a little bit of water inside the hull. And if you don't have a bilge pump, you're in for a miserable duty of trying to extract all that water. Hey, as always, thank you for dropping by. Get out there and have fun, be safe, and we will see you soon. Bye for now.